You guys can read her bio. We know that Michelle is just a wealth of information, and one of her favorite sayings is her happy place is between vascular access and data. So without further ado, let's get to Shelley.
Fantastic. Thanks, Judy. Can you hand over control of the screen? Well, as we get ready to do the handoff, I'm just so excited to have a chance to be here and getting started on this conversation. I do always need to disclose that I am a member of the board of directors with the Association for Vascular Access, and the views presented today are mine alone and do not represent those of AVA unless otherwise stated. And it looks like I can grab control.
Awesome.
All right, so as Judy and Blake mentioned, today is not a CE presentation. It's really just a chance for us to quickly come together, talk about what's going on right now on a federal level with hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia, and make sure everybody who is interested in commenting knows what they need to do to be able to submit those comments. So that's really our goal today. We're not going to go over everything there is to know about this topic. If you're interested in learning more, we do have a session at the National Scientific Meeting at AVA, and we actually have a similar one down at INS this weekend. But with that behind us, what we know right now and what really got us talking at the Association for Vascular Access about this topic and got us to the point of having this webinar today is at the SHEA Spring Conference. So that's the Society for Hospital Epidemiology in America. At their spring conference so I guess it's not last month anymore, in April, it was announced that CDC is going to be adding hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia as a surveillance protocol for hospitals with a target launch for early 2023. And many of you, hopefully, who are joining us today were a part of the original call for comments in 2019, which is when CDC first put out a call for comments on their side of potentially expanding surveillance to include all hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia. And I think we had over 100 of us send in comments, and then it didn't feel like it went anywhere. So what we're seeing right now is the progression from that initial call for comments, because actually, after that CDC call for comments back in 2019, it was actually, brought forward, and it was endorsed by the MAP, which is the Multidisciplinary Applications Partnership, which is part of NQF's convening of stakeholder groups. So back in 2019, that was endorsed June 11th, 2019. CDC has now resubmitted this measure for re-endorsement, and then that is what ultimately became included under the list of measure under consideration. I will get to that, but where we are right now, what was presented at SHEA was that the definition that would be used would be any blood culture collected on day 4 or later with pathogenic bacteria or fungi. But the really interesting thing to me is there will be complementary measures that go along with that. And what I've listed here are what was shared at SHEA. So blood culture utilization, blood culture contamination, which is a piece that's really starting to get more attention within our shared world of vascular access and infection prevention. The community onset bacteremia and fungemia, so those isolates that are occurring in the first 3 days of hospitalization, and then what they're calling matching commensal hospital onset bacteremia, which is most likely when we have a skin organism that is repeatedly positive in a patient. So the full protocol has not yet been published for those of us who are doing the surveillance from CDC, but at the same time, pretty much, Dr. Dante shared during that presentation the patient perspective, and what he had on his slide was the perception from patients that I should not be developing a bloodstream infection after I come to the hospital, whether it's due to a central line or otherwise. And this is, I think, where many of us have rallied over the years with the current reporting framework that's in place on the federal level, which is CLABSI-centric, which is central line centric. It is really underappreciated the risk or even the need for prevention strategies for devices beyond central lines. So it was really exciting to me to see that acknowledgement that really no patient should be developing bloodstream infections, regardless of whether or not they have central lines. So the overall determination for hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia is made with minimum data collection. This is going to be, from everything we know and understand right now, largely an electronically based measure. It would cast a much broader net to address patient safety outcomes in our healthcare settings. And they state that it's intended to increase awareness, promote adherence to recommended clinical guidelines, and encourage hospitals to track and improve their practices. Some of the most beautiful words I think that have ever been written. And with what's currently reported, so CLABSI and MRSA lab ID events, those are truly now a subset of hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia. And I should also say, or be very clear, I am not part of any of the CDC panels who have developed these protocols. I am not part of the NQF MAP group, and I'm not part of the CMS groups writing this. So we're coming today with information that has been gathered from what was presented at SHEA, what was presented in that list of measures under consideration, and what was presented in the proposed rule. So what I'm sharing is what I've been able to glean from my reading. But this, as I said on the Facebook Fridays, it's going to be very fluid. The document is something like 1,800 pages long, so a lot of information to understand overall about the proposed rule, but hoping to at least provide enough information that you have a sense of where things are going and if it's something you'd like to weigh in on during the public comment period. So on December 1st, 2021, CMS published their list of measures under consideration. It was actually first noted on July 15th in their list of measures under consideration, and that's what moved forward. And so the language, and you could see the quotes I'm trying to share directly from the documents. The proposed measure tracks the development of the new bacteremia and fungemia among patients already admitted to acute care hospitals using algorithmic determinations from data sources widely available in the electronic health records. This measure includes many healthcare associated infections not currently under surveillance by CDC's NHSN, and also the acknowledgement that ongoing surveillance will require a minimum data collection burden for the users. So when this first started being talked about, I will admit it was my hope that the surveillance would mirror what we're doing for CLABSI and expand it to include things like peripheral IVs, midlines, arterial catheters. But what they're actually doing is casting that very, very broad net. So not focusing only on device-associated or vascular access device-associated infections, but any positive bacteremia that's occurring in our patients starting day 4 of their hospitalization. So where we can gather together is in the analysis of that information, because the intent to be raising awareness and making sure we're following guidelines. In order for us to do that, we will need to work together to understand the underlying cause of those infections. The programs proposed to include this metric. It's coming across in several different programs. So the HAC, the Hospital Acquired Condition Reduction Program, Hospital Inpatient Quality Reporting Program, the Medicare and Medicaid Promoting Interoperability Program for eligible hospitals and critical access hospitals. That's a mouthful. And even their exempt cancer hospital quality reporting program. Again, right now, these are drafts. They're proposed measures. They are not yet finalized, but if finalized as written, this will become a future metric potentially covering many different of the CMS programs. So on April 18th, so I shared that at SHEA in April, Dr. Dantes presented on the CMS or the CDC protocol itself. And then CMS had published their measures under consideration in December. And then on April 18th, we first saw the proposed rule for federal fiscal year 2023 for the IPPS and long-term care prospective payment system. And in it, so again, cutting and pasting from the language in the standard, they're requesting information on the potential future adoption of 2 NHSN measures. One of them is C. diff, and that's not what I'm focusing on in our conversation today. But the other, they say, is the NHSN hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia outcome measure into several of their programs. And so in addition to the IQR program, the cancer program, and the long-term care program, they're talking about potential inclusion of the HAC reduction program, which are the same things we had on the previous slide. And their request for information is supporting that goal of moving to fully digital quality metrics. So this, as we look, I know I'm not alone in my frustration on the definitions that are currently used for CLABSI, even though there is a black and white surveillance protocol. The truth is, when we have a human chart review involved. There's always going to be subjectivity in the measure. I know certainly the pressure that it has created on our infection prevention teams, as well as our vascular access and infusion specialists, as we're dealing with currently a surveillance protocol or surveillance definition that is not always tightly aligned with the clinical management of the patient. So moving to a fully digital definition for hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia really removes any of the subjectivity, any of the potential gaming of the system. We currently report our MRSA lab ID events, so all positive blood cultures for MRSA, as well as our C. diff events are largely electronic measures. So there's no judgment call or determination made on the part of the organization. It's based on the dates of admission to an inpatient unit, the date of location on a unit. So we already have somewhat of a precedent for this. And you can see very clearly in their language here that they're really supporting the progression of the bacteremia reporting to be more closely aligned to a fully digital metric. So the numerator and denominator, you're going to see I've got some strikeout on here to show some of the fluidity, at least that I'm perceiving, is what's been posted. When it was posted in the list of measures under consideration, they were talking about meeting the bacteremia or fungemia criteria, and it appeared antimicrobial treatment was going to be included. From what I'm reading now in the actual proposed rule, I do not see the antimicrobial treatment listed explicitly. So I believe that's falling out, but I left it here in case you're pulling up the original source documents and trying to understand. I'm just trying to share here what I'm perceiving the current status to be. Also, you'll see any patient of any age with a recognized pathogen from a blood specimen. Originally in the list of measures, it said on calendar day 3. The proposed rule states day 4, which is consistent with what we do for MRSA and C. diff or later. And CDC and CMS start with calendar day 1 being your first date of admission to an inpatient location. If it's on the commensal list, so that's what we consider the contaminants. It must not be a contaminant. It'd be identified by culture or non-culture. But again, contamination is very relevant because the CDC is proposing these complementary metrics. I'm thinking those are going to be used as part of their risk adjustment strategy. So right now, if you've not been involved in the concepts of reducing our blood culture contamination throughout our organization and in our emergency rooms, is a chance for us to really get involved in every aspect of vascular access for our patients. So seeing that as a complementary measure is something that I think will be very powerful as we look comprehensively at our opportunities. So the numerator exceptions, if the patient's coming in and they already have an event and they develop positive blood cultures later in the hospitalization, it would not count against us as far as being counted as hospital onset if at least one of those organisms was included on admission. Once a patient has a single event that's qualifying as a bacteremic or fungemia event, they won't be recounted during that same hospitalization. Denominators are going to be expected number of events based on the predictive model, so using patient care location and other predictors. Exceptions if the patient's not in an inpatient setting, and that's true with how we do other CDC surveillance. Denominators will exclude inpatient rehab units or inpatient psych units within acute care hospitals if they have their own CMS number. Again, that's consistent with our other reporting. There's other exceptions which they say are under investigation and subject to change. So again, we're at a proposed rule right now. We don't have all the answers. The final protocol has not yet been shared to those of us in infection prevention, but just trying to let you know where it looks like these are going to be going. And then the rationale they list, we know there's multiple justification studies underway. There's some that have been published. We know in the Dante study, it was viewed very favorably among subject matter experts, 89 researchers, acknowledging that hospital onset bacteremia is perceived as preventable, reflective of quality of care, and potentially acceptable as a publicly reported quality measure. And then it's interesting when given the choice to report just CLABSIs and or hospital onset bacteremia, 57% reported either hospital onset bacteremia alone, 22%, HOB alone 22%, in addition to CLABSI 35%, 34% CLABSI alone. So some pretty strong support for at least including hospital onset bacteremia. And buried in the documents, there is the potential that over time, hospital onset bacteremia would possibly replace current CLABSI reporting and MRSA lab ID event. So there's no timelines listed in the draft for when things like that could occur, but it's acknowledged that the direction that the proposal is taking is for us to go fully digital and possibly eclipse or sunset the current reporting. So with that being said, that's kind of the background on where it looks like this is going. So it will become a CDC protocol for voluntary reporting in early 2023. The current call for comments is out from CMS about potential future inclusion of this metric in a number of the CMS reporting programs. And right now we have until June 17th to submit comments. On your screen, I have the 3 ways that you can do it. We can go electronically, and when I switch to the next screen, I'll actually show you how that looks. It is the preferred way to submit electronically. You can do handwritten comments or typed comments through snail mail. You can also use overnight or express delivery. It is worth noting that they say your comments have to be received by the closure date. So based on how I read this, I don't think your postmark is enough. It appears that they actually need to be received by that date. And that deadline is June 17th. It looks like it's 5 p.m. Eastern time. So I'm now going to click through on this because the link that was included in the actual document back here will not take you precisely to where you need to submit a comment. So we have here, and I believe Blake and Judy are going to drop that in the chat box. And I think it's also now posted on the AVA website. This link will take you straight to where we're actually going to go for comments. All right, so hopefully you are now, in fact, seeing the screen. So that link takes you straight to the proposed rule, which you can see up here. And then the comment box is in blue. When you click the comment box, you get the template. So this first place comment, start typing your comment there. This is a narrative. And so when you look at the call for comments, it's important to realize this isn't a vote as much as that could be in our favor. They acknowledge that a single quality comment of constructive feedback, either for or against, is going to be more influential than a mass campaign of form letters. So take your time. You all have experience, whether you're in vascular access and infusion or on the infection prevention side or the quality side or the medical side. You all have had experience with what our current CLABSI-centric reporting has done. Maybe you've seen the infections occurring from other devices or other sources. It's a chance to really share if you believe or disagree that this is part of what we should look at on our federal level for our quality programs. Any information you can share about who you are, your background, your experience, and how you've come to the conclusion would be very, very valuable to include. Form letters are fine, but they're not going to carry with them the same impact that a personal comment based on your beliefs after understanding a little bit more. So it's free text here. This is kind of wonky, and Judy and I were talking about that this morning. It says, what is your comment about? We found that you can select hospital, and it will just reference that this is a hospital-based comment. And you can see up at the top that you are reporting specifically on this proposed rule. If you prefer to write something as a Word document or do graphs and tables or whatever it works best for you, you can simply attach another document. If you don't want to just write up in the comment field, you can say see attached. You can add your email address. And then you identify if you're writing on behalf of yourself, your organization, or if it's anonymous. And then a little robot check for you, and you are good to go. As of last night, there had only been one comment yet submitted on this topic. So we have several, not quite several weeks, we have about 2.5 weeks left. Please take some time, educate yourself. If you have any questions, I know we're going to stay online for a bit to try to answer any questions. but I encourage you to inform yourself, take a look at the proposed rule if you need to know more, reach out, ask questions. It is my hope that we can all share our experiences and have a chance to really advocate for every patient counting, every patient mattering throughout our organization, throughout multiple platforms, and moving us beyond our CLABSI-centric focus, looking at some of these complementary measures and understanding how our practices on our density of blood culture collection, our blood culture contamination rates, and also understanding how many of our patients are coming into us already bacteremic or fungemic. There's going to be a tremendous opportunity for us all to partner together to understand what's going on, what's causing these infections, and hopefully what we can do together to prevent them. So that's what we have for you today. This was really meant to be a quick introduction. We know there've been a lot of questions, and walking you through that link and making it easily accessible could help you take the 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to go ahead and have your voice heard.
Shelley, we have a couple of questions for you.
All right.
Let's start with Kathy Kokotis. Will CLABSI be a separate measure outside of the HOB laboratory measures, or will it be melded into the HOB into a new type of measure?
Thanks for the question, Kathy. And that's where I want to be very careful in saying what we know right now is only what is in that proposed rule. So there is a suggestion in there that in the future, CLABSI and MRSA Lab ID may go, they didn't say go away, but may not be separate metrics. When Dr. Dantes presented at SHEA, he showed hospital onset bacteremia using a Venn diagram, which I'm kind of partial to, and showing CLABSI and MRSA Lab ID and actually secondary caudia and pneumonia as a subset of hospital onset bacteremia. So CLABSI as it exists today is not explicitly called out in how the surveillance would be done for hospital onset bacteremia. I don't see anything saying that CLABSI reporting would be immediately suspended, but there is language in that document about suspending the penalties currently associated with CLABSI. That's also in the proposed protocol. And I think a lot of that has to do with the experiences we've seen with HAIs during COVID the last 2 years. But sorry, I can't give you a complete answer. I wish I knew as well. From what I'm reading, though, it appears that over time, if approved, it would go to the broader metric of all hospital onset bacteremia rather than our current methods of doing CLABSI. And some of the studies, though, have shown, I think it was the work of Lisa Sturm. I shouldn't name names if I'm not positive, but I think it was the work with Sturm's group that as CLABSI oscillated, hospital onset bacteremia oscillated, which made it a very strong measure. As we improve one, we can improve the others. But lots of stuff going on. Thanks for the question.
Day 4 of hospitalization. So this is calendar day 4, as you pointed out from the document. Right now it is 48 hours post-admission. Is that changing?
So this is the same way that Lab ID event is currently. It begins with hospital day 4, with admission being day 1. So that's consistent. And historically, yes, people have had this 48-hour mindset, but with CLABSI, it's not even 48 hours. It is also based on calendar day, starting with day 3 of device utilization. So 48 hours is not explicitly part of the protocols currently, but it's days of hospitalization.
Thank you. I'm going to give you 1 second to take a sip of water if you want. Marcia Wise. See, oh, I've got your back, Shell. Marcia Wise is saying, will AVA be submitting a comment as an organization? I would like to say yes, but that is something I'm going to be working with the board of directors on because I cannot speak for AVA as a whole, but I do know people on the board. So I think we can probably, I would like to say yes, and I think we can make that happen. Okay, you got your sip of water.
I got my sip of water.
That's all you get.
So Michelle, will a CSV upload option be available for this numerator in NHSN?
I love that question. So there's a lot going on in the background. So what they say is facilitate automated secure data exchange. They're planning to enable and promote reporting of this measure using their fast healthcare interoperability resources. That is a mouthful, but they acknowledge that that is still evolving and not uniform. And yes, I'm reading this because normal people don't need to know this. So they say, and I'm sorry, I do not mean to imply that the questioner is not normal. But they're acknowledging that they want to use the FHIR capabilities, but they're not there yet. So they're planning on enabling the HL7, so the CDA, the HL7, and other formats to provide all facilities with an option for reporting. What they say is that there's not going to be an option for manual reporting, which is what we do for eclampsia right now if we're not using some of that integrated EMR that we actually can go in and type an individual eclampsia and manually enter it. It appears that that will not be an option. And I think it explicitly says a manual entry will not be an option. And they invite public comment on potential reporting formats for this measure. I hope that answered the question. So it looks like HL7, CDA, and quote, potentially other formats when they launch their FHIR capabilities.
Perfect.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I have that one pulled up.
That's amazing. Do you think this will cover patients discharged that are readmitted within 4 days with a new bacteremia?
So it does not, what I've been able to locate so far does not talk about that, but in general, post-discharge surveillance is not mandated under the CDC protocols. If you become aware of an infection, you can include it, but it is not explicitly part of the surveillance protocols in general. And again, I know we will get a lot more information when those protocols are published, but my current understanding would be no, that would not be explicitly included as a mandate.
Kathy asks, how is CDC CMS going to determine the expected number of bloodstream infections?
Oh, so normally, and again, I always want to be clear, guys, this is so evolving right now. And I'm doing my best at synthesizing what I've read and my experience. And I apologize if any of my crystal ball is slightly fogged or smudged. So risk adjustment is a big part of what we've always done with our data from CDC. And right now we don't even have baseline data published. So normally when a new metric is measured, there's a year or two of baseline data collected before they even begin publishing those comparison rates. They reference that the type of unit, the demographics, the blood culture density. So how many blood cultures probably per patient days, as well as blood culture contamination would all be used, as I read it, as part of their risk adjustment in the background. So right now it's based on our other metrics are based on your teaching status, your number of beds, your device utilization, and your location types. So they don't say anything about device utilization being part of the risk adjustment, but they left it with potentially other measures. So at this point, probably patient location, number of days, blood culture utilization, blood culture contamination, and I would assume teaching status. But I'm trying to interpret what's been shared.
Thank you. Swapna asked a great question. I love this one. Hi, Swapna. How would you advise patients and families to comment? And is it valuable for patients' families to comment?
Oh, I love that. And thank you. So my personal, I guess it's not CE, so I don't have to keep saying it's my personal opinion, but it's my personal opinion that we need to and we should hear from patients and families, because ultimately this is in the safety domain. And our whole goal is to make healthcare safe for the families and the patients who've entrusted us with their care. So I love that quote that was at the SHE presentation, that our patients shouldn't have to worry about getting a bloodstream infection during their hospitalization, regardless of whether or not they have a central line. And that really is the patient perspective that I hope will continue to come forward when we move from CDC to CMS, and that as as recipients of care and value-based purchasing, we know the federal government is a large purchaser of healthcare. So ensuring quality across the board for every patient care encounter, regardless of the source of the infection, I think that's a very viable place for patients and families to weigh in. No one wants their loved one to get any avoidable outcome, but particularly one that carries with it significant morbidity and mortality. So I think patient and family voices are absolutely welcome. And I thank you for bringing that up, because there are no parameters on who can or cannot submit comments. Everyone is welcome to submit comments on this form. So for us, for our loved ones, on behalf of our loved ones, and those of us who are directly involved in healthcare as well, medical device, there's a place for all of us to share our experience with what the current reporting structures are, good, bad, or otherwise, and how expanded reporting can potentially be a driver for improved outcomes. And as the document even mentioned, improved compliance with the evidence-based guidelines that already exist.
April asks this question. So this metric will be voluntary only versus required beginning in the early part of 2023.
So what we know right now is that the CDC protocols will be in early January 2023 opened. CDC, so NHSN, the National Healthcare Safety Network, is a voluntary program. So the first thing that happens is CDC creates a protocol that we can choose to participate in. So that is definitely happening in early 2023. That part is the voluntary part. The call for comments, though, is about CMS adopting these metrics in their performance programs across a number of hospital-acquired conditions, the IPPS, the cancer exempt reporting, all of those different programs. If that proposed rule incorporates these surveillance metrics in the future, that's when it would be mandatory. So it's definitely going to be a CDC surveillance protocol that I hope we will all participate in starting in early 2023. But what we're really talking about is CMS is proposing, or actually searching for feedback from us on switching to include that as a federal metric as well across several of their programs. I hope that makes.
That's perfect.
All right, thank you. Great question, and thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Is it early 2023 start documented anywhere outside of Dr. Dante's presentation?
So I have not seen that, and I have been scrambling. Honestly, I was frantically emailing both CDC and CMS trying to find something. CMS has been very gracious in emailing back. I've not heard back from NHSN. And I should point out, in the proposed rule, which is something like 1,700 pages, if you go through it, there are email addresses and some phone numbers to folks at CMS. So if you have questions, like from the actual regulatory side that you want to ask someone, there are phone numbers and email addresses in the back of that beast of a document. And it's real humans. They actually responded within a couple hours of me submitting my question. So no, I have not seen the early 2023 outside of the SHE presentation. The confidence that it's really happening is that in December, CMS was already publishing this proposed measures and referencing it in great detail. So in that proposed measures, the definition is in there, and in the proposed rule, a slight variation on that definition is in there.
But as you said, you haven't been, I mean, for you to, you're coming here as a public service for all of us.
Yes.
And trying to educate us on things we don't know. So appreciate all the work you've done on this to try to get as much information as you could. But I know you don't have your crystal ball either. So we appreciate you.
Yeah, they didn't ask us, right?
No, I wish they would have, but they didn't. They didn't.
Yeah. David asked a really good question here. Not that, again, to qualify things, lots of great questions. If a patient has a known bacteremia diagnosed at another facility and is transferred into my facility, do we need to send blood cultures on admission to prove present on admission, or will a known diagnosis suffice?
All right. So With our current lab ID events, it is based on location specific. So we report each new positive, each location in our organization. And so using C. diff as an example, which is not what we're talking about here, even if a patient was admitted to our facility as a known positive, it does not influence whether or not we still need to report it. There's risk adjustment with where did the patient come from. So that level of detail is not provided in the current protocols, but based on what is currently available, trying to measure my words, only clinically relevant specimens are supposed to be obtained. So if you go on the CDC website, and Blake and Judy, I can find a link to this, not when I'm talking, but we could probably pop it somewhere else.
Sure,
A number of years ago, CDC and CMS jointly sent a stern letter out to everyone, and it was focusing on only collecting clinically relevant specimens. So not doing defensive specimen collection, culturing everybody on admission so that you don't have to count something. So with definitions being based on clinically relevant, I would say the intent would not be to reculture. And it would be any positive cultures after day 4. So if your patient was coming in already bacteremic, and continued to be bacteremic after day 4, that's when it would count, to my understanding. But I would not encourage defensive culture collection. That's my opinion, and based on what I believe CDC and CMS have communicated in the past.
Perfect. Is this voluntary? Question. And does the document suggest the replacement of MRSA BSI reporting with HOB reporting?
So again, right now, when it is only CDC NHSM reporting, that is voluntary. And that's what our understanding from what was presented at SHEA is definitely going to be launched as a module in early 2023. If and when, I'd like to say if and when, I really should just say if, but I'm going to be an optimist and say if and when CMS does adopt these as proposed measures, that is when it would become mandatory. And so that's really what's on the table right now, is a chance to weigh in as a community on whether you feel hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia would be a useful quality metric to add to public reporting as basically a completely digital metric. And there was a second part of that question about the MRSA.
I just put it in another spot. 1 second. I think. Sorry. Does the document suggest the replacement of MRSA BSI reporting with hospital onset bacteremia, because of all bacteremias?
Yeah, so it is listed in one point as potentially replacing both CLABSI and MRSA lab ID. So it's got some soft language around the potential for it replacing. And actually it says we are also considering its use and the possibility of replacing the current CLABSI and MRSA measures. So I would say it's on the table as well, which I think is one of the questions that Kathy Kokotis was asking early on as well. So we are considering it and possibly replacing. So not an absolute, but one more thing that's on the table.
So we talked a little bit about how we want to avoid that day 1 culturing, the defensive culturing, those sorts of things. It's a good question from Gwen. How do you manage the hospitals that restrict culture collections instead just treat? Will there be audits for appropriate collection needs?
Oh, I love that question. And that's absolutely terrifying to me. And I hope something that these kind of broader metrics will help move us past. Let's do right by our patients every time. Let's collect cultures and treat them because we think something is seriously wrong with them. And what I believe, I feel like I'm having to hedge all these answers, but I hope you appreciate where I'm coming from. Because blood culture collection, I've got to flip back. I don't think I'm screen sharing anymore. Those complementary metrics include blood culture utilization as well as blood culture contamination. I think that's a place where some of that risk adjustment would begin to make sense. How many beds do you have versus how many blood cultures have you collected? Because that's the density of blood culturing practices. I don't know how that magic will happen in the background, but I would imagine that if a hospital's blood culture utilization, so separate from the contamination, actually how many specimens they collect, that if their specimen collection is unusually low, that would raise questions, at least to me, I think would be the way to look at that. Right now, with our device-associated infections, we know not just, say, our CLABSI rate, but we know our central line utilization ratio. So we know if we are overutilizing central lines based on risk adjustment, or potentially underutilizing central lines and using inappropriate device types. And that's the story I think that many of us have become all too familiar with. But those are how those numbers are used currently. So I would hope seeing blood culture utilization as a complementary metric means that will be weighed into the risk adjustment. But I can't pretend to understand how all those risk adjustment metrics will actually kind of be spelled out.
Are hospitals subject to CLABSI fines in 2022? Part one. And then I have part two after that.
All right. To the best of my understanding, it is a suggestion that those measures are going to be suppressed and that there will not be penalties with them. I don't want to be your only source of that information because it makes me very squeamish. In this proposed rule, you will also see language about that. If you keyword search suppress, which is kind of a weird one to keyword search, but you will see where they're discussing potentially suppressing those measures. And let me see if I can pull up that language really quick. So for fiscal year 2023, CMS is proposing to suppress the HCAHPS and 5 HAI measures. Additionally, CMS proposes to update the baseline years for specific measures for fiscal year 2025. They say they will publicly and confidentially report the HAI measure results, but will not calculate or report measure results for the PSI 90 measures for the HAC reduction program for 2023. They would suppress calendar year 2021 NHSN HAI measures for the HAC reduction program. So that's where, again, sorry for my shifty eyes, but try to make sure I'm not going off the top of my head. So that to me sounds very strongly that their intent is not to have the penalty programs associated with that, but yet still reporting them publicly, which I will say I have some conflict with, but that's my personal opinion. That and I do like seeing rebaselining, because right now our standardized infection ratios and our standard utilization ratios for our devices are based on a baseline pre-COVID. And if you've seen what's happened to our outcomes currently, it's probably time for a new baseline. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I think it's time, and I'm happy to see that referenced in here as well.
You realize I will be using a quote, pardon my shifty eyes, as a new meme. But just,
you've got too many. So can we, you said you're going to edit, right? You're going to edit this.
Oh no, not that one.
That's perfect.
A couple of questions on neonates and peds. Are pediatric hospitals required to report? And do we know if neonates will be included in this measure?
All right, so pediatric hospitals, which I am not, so I can't speak from direct experience there. I would say if your hospital is currently included in these performance metrics, so the IPPS program, if they are part of that, they would continue to be included. If they're not included in those listed programs, so the hospital acquired condition reduction program, the hospital inpatient quality reporting program, if your organization is not currently part of those, I would say they would not now be included. But because I'm not a pediatric hospital, I want to be honest, that's not my best knowledge. And then the question was neonates. If they're in the acute care hospital currently, All ages are included because it's a facility-wide measure. We have exclusion criteria only age-based for C. diff because that's it's just how that pathogen focuses, but our MRSA lab ID currently includes all age groups facility-wide.
What about risk adjusting for organizations that utilize a lot of advanced therapies like ECMO, VADS, transplants, chemotherapy outside of the cancer exempt hospitals that we currently get exclusions for CLABSIs?
Yeah, I would say there's a chance in your comments to include other proposals for risk adjustment. It's your chance to share your expertise for that risk adjustment. It's not currently one of the things that is listed, but that doesn't mean that can't change. CDC, from what was presented at SHEA, the protocol is still in development. So that to me means there's still time to have that feedback. That also could be dreaming on my part, but I think it's a fair request to understand what that risk adjustment will be, because right now a lot of it is just based on the size of the organization and whether you're a major teaching hospital or otherwise, and the device utilization ratios, but not the actual device types, which as you mentioned, carry with a lot of additional risk.
Katie comes through with a question I really like the thought process on. So what are your thoughts about what this means for the patient experience? When she first heard about HOB, it made her think of if we can get back to a place of early assessment of the patient and putting the right line in at the right time. Do you think, so you get to ponder this one. Do you think that the patient will get less lines during their length of stay and or possibly more surveillance on multiple attempts for vascular access, i.e. PIVs?
So I hope so. How's that?
No,
That's
me too. Me too. Preach it, Katie. Send this to all your peeps to comment.
This has absolutely been, for me, the dream of getting to the point where every bloodstream infection would be investigated and evaluated and treated as something that maybe we could have done better on. And maybe not all of them, since this will be secondary bloodstream infections as well, maybe not all of them can be prevented, but we can get to the point where each and every one counts. And therefore our prevention strategies really need to reach far beyond what we're currently doing. So yes, I would hope the patients will get that early vascular access assessment to make the determination of the most appropriate device type for that patient based on their medical needs and their vasculature, instead of based on trying to avoid a reportable outcome, which currently is focused only on one device. That's my hope of how the patient would benefit. And that's where I truly believe. I've got something in IRB right now, so hopefully I can be sharing a little bit of recruitment in the future. But I'm hoping that even though under hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia, there's not a requirement to do that analysis. We see that with MRSA lab ID right now. We drill down to understand what percentage of those are coming from peripheral IVs or other sources. The public reporting doesn't require that. But if you want to drive those numbers down, you need to have prevention strategies in place. And in order to have prevention strategies in place, you need to understand where the infections are coming from. It's a chance for those of us on the vascular access side to help out the infection preventionists, who are also my people, because we can pick it up and we can do some of those reviews. We can tell the story of vascular access and other indwelling devices for those patients and begin to really tell that story of what was going on that may have contributed to that infection, so that the most appropriate devices are placed, hopefully by the experts. I'll declare a little bit of bias there, but hopefully placed by the experts, maintained meticulously, and that they last the patients through their hospitalization. That's what I hope will come of this, but it might take all of us working together to help make that connection. But it's going to be, it would be worth it. I'm sorry, I can't stop smiling.
Do you anticipate the move toward fully digital reporting eventually resulting in access devices being barcoded and scanned not only on insertion, but also at each use and upon discontinuation, similar to medication administration?
So I don't think that necessarily ties into the current metric and measure at hand, because it would be laboratory based. It's based on a positive blood culture, the day the patient got admitted to the hospital, the day the patient got to a specific unit. So I don't think the barcoding of devices plays into this current surveillance protocol. But on another level, that would be amazing. I mean,
right?
absolutely. For those of us who are doing data mining and doing research or quality improvement and trying to understand what's going on with vascular access devices, if you've ever tried to identify when a device was actually initiated and when it was removed, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in the accuracy of those current data. Barcoding would be a way to address that. I think it would be, on a personal level, pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
some
absolutely amazing.
fine-tooth combed details.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Less garbage in. That'd be great. Now,
Ooh,
do you
better data out.
better data out, less garbage in, without a doubt. How do you think hospitals will appropriately manage the utilization of blood cultures on patients coming in through the ED and ICUs? And do you think this will encourage ordering blood cultures on many more patients? Now, I think you've addressed this a little bit, to make sure that the pre-hospitalization criteria, or they meet it.
So we'll start with, I don't really know. I would like to believe that it's not going to have a major impact. And my belief on that is that the majority of patients who are coming in and believed to be septic, so they're hitting our sepsis protocols, they're going to have a blood culture.
Right.
And quite honestly, even if they were coming in and being transported from another level of care with a positive culture, once they hit our door, we are probably going to obtain our own rapid diagnostics. And I don't think we see a lot of asymptomatic bacteremic patients that would warrant doing surveillance cultures on admission for blood culture. So again, I would like to believe it's not going to drive practices to do non-clinically relevant cultures. Jury's out. This is going to be new for all of us. There have been, I think, Ascension, again, Lisa Sturm's group has done a lot of research on this over the years. More recently, but it's going to be new for all of us, and we're all going to be learning, and those baselines will need to be developed before we even know if our performance is exceptional or truly troubling. And we're going to have a little bit of patience as those numbers grow and develop, whether it's just voluntary or whether it's for CMS. But I hope that we can all be involved together from the start, with starting to evaluate that data and understand where we can get involved in.
So Kimberly says, just a highlight recap of what we know for sure right now.
Oh, she's asking for one. I thought she was going to tell us one. All right.
No, she wants yours.
Okay. So what we know right now, what was presented at SHEA, is that CDC is going to be establishing hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia as a surveillance indicator in early 2023. So CDC is always voluntary reporting from the CDC side. What we know is that CMS is considering including that same metric in a number of their quality programs. So both the IPPS, the cancer PPS, the hack penalties. And so they have proposed or called for a comment, including those digital metrics in the future, which would be mandatory reporting. We have until June 17th to submit comments specific to CMS, including hospital onset bacteremia and fungemia, as a future metric in our federal quality programs. So I think that's the quick and dirty. We know CDC is going to be making the protocol available in early 23. We know CMS is considering including that in the future in their various quality programs, and that they have requested feedback from the public on that potential inclusion in the future.
Last question, to clarify, this measure does not differentiate between a patient having an IV device or not.
Correct. So this is pure from what has been shared so far, both in the measures under consideration and the proposed rule. There is no information collected on the underlying source of the infection. So it would be laboratory based, it would be the presence of a positive blood culture, and then the admission, discharge, transfer data. So the analysis or the investigation would be separate from that, and that would be up to the individual organization to determine for their own quality improvement measures what the underlying source is, which for us would largely be a review of their intravascular and other indwelling device types.
Thank you so much, Shelley.
Absolutely.
You're always a wealth of information, always fun. And guys, thanks so much. We still have over 170 of you hanging in with us. We appreciate each and every one of you. Please share the link to put out comments, and any comments you might have for us, we are always welcome to hear them. And we appreciate all of you guys. Be safe out there. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
On the AVA website at www.avainfo.org, which is also where you can join AVA or donate to the AVA Foundation. Don't miss Facebook Fridays, where we are live at noon Eastern Time each week. Toss us a question or give us a like. We're on all the social media platforms. You can follow the Association for Vascular Access on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and make sure you're subscribed to the I Save That podcast on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Pandora, or Google Play Music. Okay, folks, here comes the legal stuff. The topics discussed on the I Save That series are for informational purposes. You should personally seek the guidance of experienced clinicians before making any decision that affects your health or the health of your patient. Listeners are advised to do their own due diligence when it comes to making vascular access decisions. Our goal is to inform and educate the healthcare landscape while giving you a starting point for your discussions with more experienced clinicians and professional advisors. By listening to this program, you agree that the hosts, presenters, guests, sponsors, and the Association for Vascular Access are not responsible for the success or failure of your health, your career, or any decision you make related to any of the information presented. The I Save That series may contain segments of copyrighted music that was not specifically authorized to be used, but is protected by federal law and the Fair Use Doctrine, as cited in Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act. If you have specific concerns about this program or our position on fair use defense, please contact us at avaed@avainfo.org. No part of this program shall be reproduced, transmitted, or sold in whole or in part, or in any form without prior written consent from the Association for Vascular Access. Okay, guys, one more disclaimer for you. Presenter bias. Bias is a disproportionate weight in favor or against an idea or thing in the context of presenter bias. And for the purpose of this presentation, it's important for attendees to acknowledge if bias towards a sponsored product was demonstrated during the presentation. AVA screens the presenter's work in order to mitigate bias during the presentation. The Q&A section is outside of the presentation material, and specific product names and use may be discussed at that time. As a continuing education provider for the Board of Registered Nursing, AVA is required to provide this education on implicit bias as part of California Assembly Bill 241, Section 2736.5. This legislation that was passed regarding professional education of registered nurses in 2019.